to begin to build your slab, when you've got a slab rolled out and it's big enough to cover your drawing, and you've taken that slab of clay and placed it over the top of your paper, and it does cover the paper, then you're ready to start to transfer the drawing and cut out your pieces. So you can see how this slab is a lot longer than my paper. I'm going to trim off some of that extra, and I'm going to save this piece for some practice. But in order to get this design to print onto the clay, I'm going to need to outline with a Crayola marker. Crayola markers are not permanent, so that's why we outline with Crayola. Does not matter what color you're working with, but what you're going to do is outline the outside edge of whatever your first slab of clay is going to be. So for me, my bottom slab is going to be this wiggly design. And then if you drew anything that is needing to be carved into the first layer of clay, you could also outline that with marker. So if your beginning slab is just the basic rectangle shape, then you're just going to trace that rectangle with your marker. Then what you're going to do is take that slab of clay, excuse me, and you're going to set that on top of your piece of paper, and you're going to gently patty cake that. And I like to kind of sandwich it between my two hands and then flip it over, and then also kind of massage or rub the back of the paper to get that marker to print onto the clay. And you can see when you peel it back, the marker will show up on the clay. So now I'm going to remove this, and now you can see that I've got that marker outline on the surface of the clay. Now if you make a mistake and you decide you don't like it, all you need to do is just wipe the marker off. You can use your water bottle and a sponge. Just spray that sponge a little bit, and then so I'm going to print it on my extra piece of clay right here. Okay, so if I darken that again. Alright, if I need to take the marker off the clay, I'm just going to take my wet sponge and I'm just going to wipe that away. But you never draw with the marker directly into the clay. You make a print from a piece of paper. Okay, now I'm ready to cut through this. So the tool we use to cut with is the fettling knife. We do not cut with a needle tool. A needle tool is not thick enough to do cutting. It ends up breaking that needle tool off. So use the fettling knives to do the cutting. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of stand that knife up tall, press down until I hit the tabletop, and then I'm just going to slowly work around the edge, cutting out my pieces. It's okay if it changes slightly. Not a big deal if it's not exactly like my drawing. My drawing was just kind of a guide to help me get started. So that's the first step that you need to do, is cut out your bottom slab of clay. Alright, when I'm done carving out my first slab of clay, I need to think about the visual that I want to have as a finished product. Now remember that this marker evaporates, it disappears. So if you didn't cut exactly on the marker line, no big deal, it's just going to evaporate over time. But as a finished clay piece, you want to envision, how's this surface going to look? Do you want it to stay smooth, or do you want to put texture into your clay? So I like to store this piece on my fabric on top of my project board, and then I put that on my chair and push my chair under my table and get that off the table so it doesn't actually accidentally get destroyed. But I've got these extra pieces of clay that I can play around with to figure out texture. So texture is anything that you press into the clay. A lot of students decided to make their bottom slab look like bricks. So practice creating a brick texture in the surface of the clay. Now the one thing you want to be careful with when it comes to doing texture is not using the knife to carve the texture, because the knife cuts too deep in the clay, and if you cut too deep, then the whole clay just rips apart. So that's why I don't like to use the knife. The needle tool, you also have to be very, very careful, because if you push too deep, you're going to cut through the clay. So I like to use wooden tools to do the carving. So if this clay isn't smooth anymore, just use your finger to kind of smear and smooth it. But you could practice using a wooden tool to draw texture lines. So if it's going to become a brick wall, you could do something like this. Okay. And that might be one look of a texture that you might carve into your clay. You could turn this over and try something different on the back side. There are Lego pieces in your box. You could see what happens if you push a Lego piece into the clay, where you might make designs with Legos. That's what happens with the dots. Maybe you see what happens with a print from the edge of the Lego. Some of these are bigger than others, so that could make a brick design. You do something like that. But I also have some texture tools that are just spread out. There's kind of one at every table, so they all have different designs in them, and you could experiment on practice clay to see if you like the look of any of these texture tools. So what you would use with this tool is you would set it on the slab of clay and then roll it across the clay, and you kind of have to figure out how hard, how much hand pressure do you need to get the print. So that's what that one looks like. There's this one. But again, I only have 8 of these texture items, so you just kind of have to share around the room to find ones that you might want to work with to put texture into the surface of the clay. So you always want to texturize your bottom slab first before you put your next slab on top. So that's the first decision you need to make. Is this going to stay smooth, or are you going to put texture into the surface? Okay, I decided to roll my texture item on top of my bottom slab, so I've got this sort of texture on it as the foundation. So this piece I'm going to set off the table. I'm going to put it on my project board on top of the rag, and then put that on my chair and push it under the table. Then you need to roll out a second slab of clay that you're going to make a print from your drawing. So look at how you colored on your second slab of clay. Look at your key code if you have your colored version. And you're going to outline that with a marker. Doesn't matter to me if it's the same color as your first slab or a second color. Makes no difference to me. But you're going to outline just like you did on your first slab. And then once you're done drawing, you're going to make a print of that onto your second slab of clay. Alright, once I've got all my second slab traced out, now I'm ready to make a print. What I'm going to do is, same thing as before, I'm going to take that slab of clay, I'm going to turn it and place it on top of my paper. I'm going to press that into the paper, and then I'm going to sandwich it, flip it over, and then I'm going to finish massaging the back of the paper to make sure it is printing. Okay, and it did make a print. So now you'll notice it printed backwards, because that's what happens when you print backwards. That is not a big deal, because I'm going to now cut out these letters. So I'm going to take my knife and I'm going to carefully try and cut on top of my pencil drawing. And I think it's easier to hold the knife kind of on the metal piece. Remember, it's not so sharp that it's going to cut you. The fettling knife is not that sharp. If you make a mistake and you accidentally cut something wrong, no big deal. Just roll out another piece of clay that's big enough to fit that particular letter, if it's a letter you're cutting out, or whatever shape you're cutting out, and then just print it a second time. and then cut that one out and see if you're more successful. Okay, so now when I finish, I can carefully separate that, and this is my letter K, but it's backwards, so all I have to do is flip it over. When I flip it over, it does line up with my original drawing. So don't worry if you're like, oh, it's going to be backwards. You just turn it over and you're just going to make it face the other direction. Then I want you to set this piece on your project board, get it off the table so you're not accidentally ruining these, and I'll show you how we attach them once we've got all the pieces cut out. So continue to cut out the rest of your layer 2 pieces. Okay, now I'm ready to attach these letters to my first slab. So I'm going to look at my drawing and kind of position these in a similar location. Although I forgot that I needed to flip mine over, because that's actually how it matched up. So now I realize that when it's flipped over, my texture's on the wrong side. So that might happen to you. No big deal. Just get your texture rollers and put your texture back on the correct side that needs to be. And my clay's starting to separate a little bit. I'm just going to kind of smear that and swish that back together. And then I'm going to roll my texture across my piece again. All right. So now I'm ready to get my letters attached. Okay, so this is what that slab looks like. Okay, so I had a letter K here, then my E, my N, D-A-L, because I did my last name. L. Okay, so this is how I had mine drawn out. So now I'm going to begin to attach these letters one at a time by following the 4 S's: score, slip, stick, smooth. So the first thing that I want to do before I attach is I want to look at these pieces. Are these pieces nice and smooth on the edges? If they're lumpy, if you see a lot of cracking on the surface, you're going to want to smooth that out before you attach it down. So I often just like to use my dry finger to do the smoothing. Another thing you could do, though, is dip your finger in a little bit of water to kind of smear the edges to kind of get them nice and smooth. Okay, so this letter is going to attach right here. So when we attach pieces of clay, we score, slip, stick, smooth, and we're going to be using the toothbrush to be doing that. However, I need to know where I'm going to score that clay. So this is where you could use a needle tool and really soft hand pressure to make a real light carving around your shapes of whatever your second slab of clay is. I say light hand pressure because you don't want to cut through the clay. You just want to get an outline right up next to that shape. Okay. Then, when you take this off, you can see that you've got a line or an edge to know where to do the brushing. So, one student can go put water inside your bowl, fill it half full so you're not spilling, and then you've got toothbrushes in your bucket. So, I taught you to score, slip, stick, smooth. So you're going to take the toothbrush, dip it in water. Then inside these lines that you carved, you're going to score the clay. The bristles are going to scratch the surface of the clay. The water on your toothbrush is making slip at the same time. So I brush where it's going to attach, and then I'm also going to brush on the back side. So if it's going to sit like this, I have to turn it over, and I'm going to dip my toothbrush in water, and I'm going to brush to score a slip. I should see the bristles scratching the clay, and I should see the slip on the surface. Then I stick. Step 3. Score, slip, stick. And you want to press down hard enough that they actually attach, but you don't want to press so hard that you leave fingerprints in your clay. And then the last thing we do is smooth. This is where you might come back around the edges and kind of smooth those edges. If you have a lot of slip that has squeezed out of the corners, you could wipe that away. And I really just like to use my finger just to do the smoothing. And then I'm going to repeat that with my next pieces of my second slab of clay. So I'm going to take my needle tool, and I'm going to trace around my letters, whatever that shape is that you're attaching. I'm going to pick that up. Now I can see where to brush. So I'm going to brush, turn my letter over backwards. I'm going to brush, score, slip. Step 3 is stick. Step 4 is smooth. So you need to make sure you do the 4 S's on every single piece of clay you are attaching to your first layer. Okay, I am working on my third layer now. So I traced my shape. That's going to be my third layer, which is like this kind of paint splatter. And I rolled out another slab of clay, but I actually rolled it even thinner than my guide sticks because this piece is going to attach to the surface. So it doesn't have to be as thick as it was for your first 2 layers. So I took a rolling pin and I just rolled it a little thinner. So it's gonna not stick up quite as high. And then I printed it with a marker, and I'm gonna cut this out and attach this over the top of layer 2. So you're welcome to change the thickness of that last layer. So you can see it's a lot thinner than the first 2. And then this piece is going to be attaching over the top of my letters. So I want to decide if it's going to cover up the letters or if I want to try to mold it so it looks like it's folding over the letters. So if I want it to be molded to my letter, then I might use my fingers and kind of smash it around the edges. So I can still tell that I've got this letter L here. So it might bend over one letter kind of like that. Or I could just set the piece. So if this is my next kind of splatter, I could just set it on top like that and attach it that way. Either way, it would be fine. You just decide kind of the final look that you want to have. And then you're going to score, slip, stick, smooth. So if you need to, trace the edges on where to score and slip. Then, so I'm going to brush here, brush in between. I'm going to brush the back sides of these. And then I'm going to stick. Score, slip, stick. So these are going to kind of fold in between my letters. So it looks like I kind of have this paint splatter that is drooped or draped across the tops of my letters. So that's how I'm going to finish up with my third and final layer. Alright, when you have all 3 layers finished and everything is attached, so you've got your scored slip stick smooth, all 3 layers. Then the last thing that we're going to do is double check your refining on your edges. So any edges that are starting to crack or have little like bumps and lumps on, you're going to want to smooth those away. So the very last thing I do is I just dip my finger in a little bit of water and I just start to smooth those rough edges. Your clay is leather hard at this point, so now you can use water to start to do this smoothing because your clay has dried up enough that when you dip it in water, it's just going to kind of soften those rough spots. Then, when you're done refining and smoothing out your edges, the last thing that you need to do is carve your first and last name on the bottom of the back of your project. Now, I know that the majority of you did a portion of your first or last name for this assignment, but there's enough students in here who did middle names or nicknames. I need to know exactly who made this project. So work together if you need someone to help you. But I'm just going to kind of turn this over and support it on my hand, and using an ink pen, not any other supply, but just the ink pen, you're going to carve your first and last name into the bottom. So I know for certain whose this is. Then if you could also put your class period and what color day I have you, so like 2P for second period purple day, that is how we finish. Then these projects have to dry for a week to turn bone dry. So you are no longer going to use your bag and your rag. You're just going to set this project on your project board and you're going to let it dry out on your shelf. So just set it on top of the fabric. Don't wrap it with the fabric, but put it directly on the fabric on the board. Go put it on your shelf to dry for the next week so I can fire these and then we'll be painting them.